I wanted to ask about diagnoses, because you talked about it a little bit, and I know we got a question earlier today. Sometimes folks come out with several diagnoses, or present, is that a proper way to say it? Present with several diagnoses. So sometimes functioning disorder, do you guys actually diagnose that? Is that?
I'm sorry, you came out for the executive functioning disorder, is that what you said?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No. So no.
It's not
no, and it's quite common, if it were to exist, to present with various executive functioning deficits and not really meet the full criteria for any other disorder. So it does happen quite often. Yes. In addition to, we have some cases where they're comorbid, where there's a learning disability with ADHD or ADHD with anxiety, and there are other, different combinations. So I feel like this process kind of allows to differentiate if necessary.
So you're right. So that's an example where if you have issues with your executive functioning skills, how you show up as your best self is going to suffer because your executive functioning skills aren't all. So it's not a diagnosis, but it still really can impede your function.
Of course. Yes, definitely.
And then you have cases, which is the question I got today, was, like a diagnosis of anxiety and a diagnosis of ADHD. And it's always first, right? The chicken or the egg. And there might be a little processing happening in there. And there might be a little happening in there, like which came first, which one do you attack first? So when you come up with your recommendations, I always look for the one that's interfering most.
Yes.
And backwards from there. And sometimes it's hard to tell. Is it inattention? Is it anxiety? Is it? So how do you handle that when you do your recommendations for families?
Yes, I actually just do just that. So I look at the adaptive functioning. So how much is it impacting their social skills? How much is it impacting their academic life or their learning process? How much is it affecting their self-care? And based on that, how is it impacting their daily living skills? Do we determine okay, how are we going to prioritize? And unfortunately, in some cases, we have to prioritize more than one at the same time. We kind of just have to, and that's a big one. And sometimes, for example, with very complex cases, the handwriting, maybe they do have some fine motor deficits, but it's not the most significant issue. So we kind of just
handwriting is not your main thing. I know it's right now probably the easiest and the safest for you to feel like you want to help, but let's look at this and that before we do the thing. Yeah, I think sometimes the kids have they'll have ADHD and they'll have anxiety, but the anxiety will only show up during academic pieces.
Yes.
Because I guess it depends on temperament. Sensitive. Are they one to blow everything off? Those kids that blow everything off, they're usually not very anxious.
Yes, and they're all so different, Nicole. I mean, that's one of the issues I have with
hard
labels or exceptionalities or meeting criteria, that it's not just because they have this diagnosis or DSM code attached to them doesn't mean that they're going to fall into the same category with everyone else. Every child is so different and so unique. I mean, and so that's part of it. So I always discourage that. Well, yeah, he's ADHD, but no, there's more to that. What kind? What's the presenting symptom? Is it impulsive? Is it hyperactive? Is it inattentive? So there's so many different variables and so many different combinations, I believe, of different symptoms that could be impacting a child. So, and that's, where I would help the families distinguish and plan effectively.
So it's as early as 3, you can do developmental evaluation.
Yes.
And all the way through, what's the oldest child you've?
I mean, I've worked, if it's educationally relevant, as old as 22, 23. For example, sometimes students are sitting for the GRE or graduate school exams, so they need a reevaluation for like accommodations, etc. So in those cases, obviously, it's necessary to have an evaluation. So even well into their 20s, I've evaluated.
Do you have adults coming to you that are like, oh, I always thought that I had this or that, and I never did anything about it, but now I know about it? Can you find out if I have dyslexia? Or?
I have had calls. I just refer. I do refer out because unfortunately, I don't work with adults that have not had previous diagnoses or evaluations. Yes.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's a specialty. Do you find that now within the past year, you've had an increase in families wanting to get their child tested? Has it been the same?
Yes.
Or I feel like more people are spending, it's twofold. More people are spending time with their kids like at home all day. They're like, oh, wow, we're really struggling here. And the other side is I feel that a lot of kids that didn't struggle are struggling because now if they're still home doing virtual school, that's a whole other back in terms of missing non-verbal language. It's really hard to stay engaged. You don't have any of the cues around you. So things are showing up that didn't happen.
Yes. Yes, no, definitely. I've seen a significant increase as a result. I mean, it's a combination. So yes, I see what you've seen with families being more in tune with their children's needs. They've observed certain behaviors that are concerning to them, which has basically motivated them to seek help. Yes, a majority of those cases are the ones that I'm seeing right now. Many families also delayed testing because of COVID, because of the pandemic, which are, in terms of, fears of contamination, obviously. So they remained quarantined and they delayed the evaluation process. So yes, to answer your question, there is a significant rise in evaluations right now.
Yeah, I would think so. And then I'm sure you have to then investigate, like, when we do our evaluations for the school students, we have to do it at their home. So how are they functioning as a student in a virtual classroom?
Yes.
Right?
It's so unique that I've had to come up with a list of virtual accommodations for virtual learners, just so that.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yes.
We're just for today, but if we do this again soon, that's what we can talk about. That's a good one. We had a question here. If psychoeducational evaluations are covered by insurance, I know that depends entirely on your insurance company. I'm going to say some are and some aren't. That's what I'm going to say, but I don't know if you have more insight.
I mean, personally, I do not accept insurance. However, and I'm sure a lot of psychologists are aligned in the way I run my practice, but we provide a super bill where we provide you with a super bill that you can submit to your insurance company, and they may or may not reimburse you. So otherwise, I believe, you could always try like the hospitals, the universities, University of Miami, perhaps, but just generally they are not covered.
Yeah, I think maybe sometimes that initial visit, because it will count as a therapy session. It really depends on the insurances is what I found.